This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Here's your host, Brandon Contes.
All righty, welcome to episode 89 of the Awful Announcing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Contes, and this week we are joined by the co-host of the Throwbacks podcast with Matt Leinart. Some people know him as Turtle from Entourage. Others know him as a Knicks superfan. He is Jerry Ferrara. Jerry, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. What gets the nerves going more, Knicks-Pacers Game 7 last year or the opening night of a movie premiere?
You know, I would at one point in time, I would have said opening night of a movie premiere because the Knicks weren't really in a whole lot of Game 7s back then. And even if you cut to now, there's not many opening nights that, for me, could rival what a Game 7 for this team could be. To the point where, you know, you mentioned what Throwbacks with Leinart. We were in New York last year doing like promotional stuff for the show before we launched, and it was Game 2 Knicks-Pacers. And we were at this place, T Squared Social something, a Tiger Woods golf simulator place doing the event. And the Garden's a few blocks away. And I had tickets, and Leinart couldn't believe we wrapped the thing up at 8 that I wouldn't shoot over to Madison Square Garden at 9 for Game 2. Because in my mind, I would have missed like most of the third quarter. And he's like, yeah, but we'll be there for the fourth quarter. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. We don't sit out quarters in a cab trying to get to the game. We watch the game.
What is your first real Knicks memory?
My first real Knicks memory, it's plain as day. I remember not having school. I think it was Martin Luther King Day, I believe. It was the Trent Tucker game. That's how old I am, where we kind of got the 0.1 tenths of a second on the clock, and he got off a corner three to beat the Bulls. I remember watching that game. First time I kind of knew what was going on and really started to understand basketball. And I remember watching like Jordan being like, wow, this guy's awesome. Maybe I like the Bulls. But the Knicks are from New York. I got to like the Knicks. And then Trent Tucker hits that three, and it kind of sealed my fate as a Knicks fan.
Yeah, so misses that three. You could have ended up being a
who knows?
Very
yeah,
lucky Bulls fan.
I had a few kids growing up in Brooklyn in like junior high that were Bulls fans, just solely based on Michael Jordan.
Yep, yeah, of course. For me, it's 1995. Like I remember the Knicks being in the yeah, that's it. I remember the Knicks being in the finals in 94 and like waking up in the morning and asking my dad what happened. But 95, I remember where I was watching that. I remember being a kid crying after the Knicks lost, and like from that moment on, I was forever emotionally invested in this team. Maybe unfortunately.
Yeah, that was a tough one. I remember, I believe that one ended like shortly before like dinner time, and we were supposed to go play a little hoops at like the schoolyard. And I remember walking up there with my ball, and everybody was just so down. It was like the most bummer pickup game of all time for a bunch of 15-year-old kids.
What are your expectations for the Knicks, for this Knicks team right now?
So this is where, for me, I start to feel my age, okay? Because, obviously I'm pretty outspoken on Twitter, like most Knicks fans are. Knicks Twitter is a very, very real place and a, at times, beautiful thing and at times illogical thing. Look, I like to keep expectations in check, and I like to stay positive, only because I have sat through all the negativity of the last, I don't know, what do you want to call it, 20 years? However far back you want to go up until you get to about 94, with the couple of blips in 99, 2000, and then, 2013, Melo versus the Pacers. So I do have I'm just happy to be here mentality, which a lot of Knicks fans who are probably 30 and under don't have, because for the last 5 years, it's been pretty good. Now, they sat through some dark times, too. Don't get me wrong. If you look at the roster before Leon Rose got in, it was pretty crazy to look at that compared to now. But for me, I am very, very happy with the way the team has played. Obviously, I'm just as concerned as everybody else with the whole 0-7 debacle and some lack of effort. There's a million things we could point to for that. But I am a believer in the fact that we are a good regular season team. And I really do think that we don't know the final form of this team that'll take place in the end of April when the playoffs kick off. We really don't. And there's a lot of questions, but I am very, very happy where the team's at right now. And of course, I'm bummed at the 0-7 thing. Even though 2 of those games were kind of blown, those were like choked away by us. First one again with the Cavs, and the first one with the Thunder. But I think we're in a good spot. I see all the flaws, but I'm staying positive, man. I'm not feeding into this fire Tibbs and I'm a sheriff in the minutes police. I have a badge in the minutes. I hate it, but fire Tibbs, like come on, get over it.
Yeah, the 0-7 thing doesn't bother me too much because in the 2012-13 season with Carmelo, when they won the 54 games, I think they were 3-1 against Miami that year.
Yes.
I think there was also a season when LeBron was on the Heat where I think it was the Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce Nets year where the Nets swept Miami in the regular season. And then in the playoffs, they got swept or they lost in 5. But they got destroyed by Miami in the playoffs. So like it doesn't concern me too much, the 0-7 thing. I don't know what this team is or what their identity is, because like Thibodeau teams are not meant to outscore their opponents. And like, yes, this team is definitely better, I think, from a talent perspective than last season's team with Karl Anthony Towns on it. They're obviously better offensively, but last year's team just had, it was a little bit more like the 90s Knicks, like where they had that grit of like, we might not be better than you, but we're going to outwork you. We're going to be more physical than you. And like, that's how we're going to try to beat you. Whereas this team, it doesn't feel like they have that identity yet, and kind of like still waiting for that to happen. And granted, it is still just, it is February and it's their first season together. So like there's time for that to still happen.
Look, I was actually talking to the great Ian Begley the other day too. It's like, I get it. Last year's identity was so clear and so defined, right? We had the 2-headed monster of Hartenstein and Robinson. And even when Robinson would go out, we still had an amazing center, and it was defense. The Knicks last year didn't get blown out. Rarely did they lose by 40 to a team, or were they down 27 going into the third? It just didn't happen. So to me, the team this year has a much, much higher ceiling, but also a much, much lower floor, meaning if they're not hitting their threes, like you said, this is kind of an offense-first team. If they're not hitting their threes, they don't grab a lot of rebounds because, Cat's a great rebounder, but OG and Bridges have not rebounded well this year. And I get it. Bridges is being pulled way out on the perimeter. How's he really supposed to rebound? But maybe he can. And, I just think that the ceiling is high and the floor is a little bit lower. There are these games where if they're not hitting threes, they could get shelled. And look, if you want to stack yourself up against Boston, if we're saying the Knicks are a finals contending team, going through Boston, no matter what, even if we were 2-0 versus the Celtics, I wouldn't feel okay. Yeah, maybe I'd feel like slightly better. Oh, okay, we could win. When you're playing in a playoff series and you're seeing this team each and every night, and you can really make adjustments and lock in, and you're not playing like the Hawks in an overtime night game the night before and all that stuff, it's just a whole different season. So that's how I look at it. And it was a shame that we never got to see the team last year with Randall and a healthy Knicks last year versus Boston, because I think we would have got past the Pacers easily. But I'm not writing this season off by any stretch, but the Celtics are they're beasts, and they're healthy. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, and I have a similar mindset of just like, I am kind of happy to be here just because they were so bad for so long. So like I would have, given anything just to be a 7 or an 8 seed, 10 years ago. And then now here they are, like a legit 3 seed. And some fans are starting to talk about, should they fire Tibbs and things like that. So
I just think that's crazy. I even saw like a Leon thing.
Moves, but I think next year is when I'll start to feel like some of the pressure. Yeah. And getting rid of Leon Rose also, like that, like he's to think that you could replace him with anybody better at this point is ridiculous.
Well, look, if it does become a 3-6, say, Knicks-Pistons series, if that doesn't go well, it will be a long off season of talks, and those questions will be asked, because the expectations are not getting eliminated in the first round. You could say, hey, you're going to run into the Celtics and maybe you get eliminated there, but there's just a lot going on. I know it went from we need Mitch back to now everyone's like, oh, Mitch ain't going to save this. Look, Tibbs is the defensive coach. Can you give him a rim protector? Maybe he could right the ship a little bit.
Right. You
And
got to
I think he
think, yeah,
could.
you got to think that Tibbs could at least fix the defense a little bit as they get towards the playoffs.
You would think. And look, we saw Cat next to Rudy Gobert make the Western Conference Finals and really were close to making the finals and played well against Jokic and all that stuff. So, I do got to see it. I thought what Tibbs said was very telling. We've been out a starting center for what'd you say there, Coach? So he's gonna start? What? I mean, he knows it. He knows it.
You're at least you're a Giants and Yankees fan too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm Knicks, Mets, and Jets. Like 36 years old, Knicks, Mets, and Jets, still waiting for a championship.
Yeah, you haven't gotten
nothing.
You weren't around in 86, right?
No.
Yeah, that knocks that. Oh man.
Yeah.
Shoot. Sorry, bud.
So what do you want the Giants to do at quarterback? Do you have any connections to Matthew Stafford out in Los Angeles? Are you looking to get him to New York?
Look, I have a great respect for Stafford. I think he's awesome to watch. I think there's like a version of the Rams like making the Super Bowl the last 2-3 years in a row almost. Like they hung around and got hot at the right time. I know he wants to get paid, and as he should want to get paid. You know, I think every football player should try to make as much money as possible. I don't know. All right, let's put the Stafford hat on. Okay, so you make this move to get Stafford, whatever it is. I mean, obviously, there's no way to give up their first round pick. That's insane. However that move goes. And what, are we drafting Travis Hunter then at 3? Okay. There's still a million holes to fill. I just feel like Stafford's much more of a win now guy, and I think the Giants don't necessarily have a win now roster. I would like to see it. It would be fun, but it's not like he's gonna come in. What's his floor, right? Is the Giants a 7-win team? So it's not like you're drafting Arch Manning then the next year. So I don't really know what that plan looks like fully.
Yeah. He almost makes more sense for the Jets because they have a better roster, but like
much better.
The Jets, after trying it with Aaron Rodgers, I don't think they're going to go for another aging veteran quarterback.
No, but who do they go? I mean, not my team, but I don't hate the Jets like I did as a kid because I grew up with way more Jet fan friends. So, it's not Aaron Rodgers, as we know. If it's not Stafford, I mean, are you in the Justin Fields camp? Are you trade up and draft a quarterback? Which
I think it's going to end up. I think it'll end up being Tyrod Taylor, and like I'm almost just
I think that's the right answer.
Fine with that for a season, and just like let the new regime kind of have a year where they're able to kind of clean house a little bit and reset. And I don't think they would have been able to do that with Aaron Rodgers. As much as like as a Jets fan, I was in favor of keeping Aaron Rodgers just because I have this irrational fear that he's going to go somewhere else and lead them to a Super Bowl. And then like the Jets are again just the laughing stock for letting him go.
No, you have justifiable reasons.
Okay.
I think,
All right. So rational concerns.
Funny thing though, with Tyrod Taylor, who I think has just been one of the most unluckiest players in the NFL ever. Obviously, the thing with the Chargers where he finally gets a shot and he gets stabbed in the lung with a needle and collapses his lung. And he's not a big quarterback, so the injury is always a thing. But here's what I know from his tenure with the Giants. When Daniel Jones was having issues moving the balls, we all saw, why isn't this guy throwing downfield? Is no one open? All right, he has no time with the offensive line. All right, maybe it's not his fault. When we were all still tricking ourselves a little bit, and I still think Daniel Jones might turn out to be something, but when we were all tricking ourselves as Giant fans, it's like it's not all on Daniel Jones. Tyrod comes in, and next thing you know, they're throwing the ball downfield, and they're completing 40-yard passes to Slayton, which Daniel Jones wasn't even looking downfield. And I just thought, man, this guy moves the ball. He's a very, very smart quarterback. And yeah, I could see with the right roster around him of it being a big threat. I would like to see it, to be honest. I think the guy deserves a chance. Can he stay healthy will always be the biggest question.
Yeah. Speaking of quarterbacks, how is working with Matt Leinart?
He's the best, man. So Matt and I have an interesting way we've come together later in life. Obviously, 2003 Heisman champion. He's in LA. 2003, 2004. I had just started Entourage 2003, 2004. I'm a little bit older than him. And I wasn't a big run around town guy, but I would always say, the USC guys are here. that, they were like the Beatles in a way. They were the most famous college football team, maybe of all time. If you really look back at that team with Reggie Bush, and created the tush push too. I blame him for all that every day. I say, we have to deal with this stuff with the Eagles because of you and Reggie against Notre Dame. Horrible. And then we reconnect all these years later. He's got three now young kids. He just had another baby. He has an older son too, Cole, who's going off to SMU to play quarterback, which is cool.
Yeah.
And we just, it's hard to make friends later in life, Brandon. It just is. You have family. So through this show, I'm inherently making a great new friend. And also everyone, it's easy to get guests. It's like, oh, you want to talk to me? Some people are like, yeah, maybe. I don't know if they know Entourage or Power, but then it's like, oh, Leinart's I know Leinart. Sure. He's a good guest getter. He makes it easy to get guests.
Yeah. So how did you guys get put together if you didn't really you weren't friends prior?
Yeah. So, I started a podcast back in 2012 with my wife that ran for a very long time. We only stopped it because we started having kids and it just got too crazy. So I've always loved the space. I was in the space since 2012, and it really was a love of sports talk radio too, and WFAN and all that stuff. And then Sinclair reached out to me because they were launching this podcast network and really wanted, and they have a great college football show, Triple Option, with Urban Meyer and Mark Ingram and Rob Stone. And we started talking about potential co-hosts, and a lot of names got thrown around. This is really the cool part of social media. Leinart for a long time was never on social media, and then he gets Big Noon, the Fox show, right? Mm-hmm. So, and he wants to basically have a social media presence and show the other side of him. He had just started popping up all these years later on all my Instagram feeds. Like I said, I didn't even know he had young kids, Manhattan Beach dad. I'm like, what is Leinart up to? And then the next day in the meeting, Sinclair is like, what about Matt Leinart? I'm like, I was just watching some of his TikTok stuff. He's absolutely hilarious. I'm like, that's really interesting. Let's have a podcast blind date, which we did. And it was from that moment on, we had a 2-hour conversation. It was on from that moment.
Is was chemistry instant? Is chemistry something that you think has to be instant? Can it develop?
Chemistry is a funny word. I have been the benefit of a lot of things in my career that chemistry really worked in my favor. If you look back at Entourage, I'd like to say we all had a lot of chemistry. Those guys are still my brothers in life today. We talk all the time. Chemistry is not something you could cast. Meaning, you could say, oh, let's cast these two people. We think they'll have good chemistry. I've seen really good friends not have any on-screen or on-microphone chemistry. And I've seen total strangers, when put together, have an insane amount of chemistry. It's the magic. It's the lightning in the bottle. So with Leinart and I, yeah, it felt like we had it in our personal lives as we got to know each other. But when we turned the mics on and we did a test show in LA, and this is dead of summer, nothing really to talk about. We went for 2.5 hours, just BSing about everything. And we knew there, okay, we at least know we're not going to have dead air for a long time.
You mentioned started podcasting in 2012. Are you surprised by the way the industry has grown?
No, not in the slightest. And I'm not saying I knew I'm a smart person. I just knew I used to be really good at reading the tea leaves of where things are going. I no longer am good at it because I think I'm old and I'm not able to keep up with everything. But yeah, I always knew look, radio's not going anywhere, but this is the new version of that. And there's a lot of either smart or funny or knowledgeable or entertaining people. I loved the audio platform. Now we all watch podcasts too. YouTube's the most watched service. But I just loved always having these things in my pocket with me at all times, whether it was the gym, an airplane ride, a long car ride. I just loved it. So yeah, I knew it was, I didn't know some shows would start to be bought for hundreds of millions of dollars, but I certainly knew that this was the way that media was going. And I didn't think that everyone would take a swing at it.
Yeah.
Which I think is both amazing and also just overwhelming. It's hard to find any show these days because you go to your feed and there's 14 new ones that day. But I love it. I'm very pleased with the way it's gone.
Yeah, I feel like it wasn't really until the pandemic that any sort of stigma surrounding podcasts was totally erased. But I felt like it took a while for podcasts, and now not only is it no longer the thought of just you don't think of podcasts obviously as somebody sitting in their mom's basement anymore, but like every celebrity now has
Everyone.
a podcast. And I go through this back and forth of like, did celebrities hijack the podcast industry? Or then I also sometimes I do wonder, like, is there enough people to even listen to all these podcasts?
Good points. Here's what I'll say with the celebrity angle of it. I think what happened initially is almost sort of to what even happened with like early Netflix days, where it was almost like, hey, do a podcast. It's like a free money grab,
Yeah.
Just turn on the mic and start rambling with another actor or director or whatever and see where it goes. And I think some of them were good and most of them were really not good. I don't think a lot of effort was being put in, but then you started to see what you could do in the audio only format and then where the video started going. I think the ones you see today, immense amounts of effort are put in and they're highly produced and thought out. And they're no longer just like, let's turn the mic and riff. And I mean, comedians are very good at that because that's what they do. But as far as actors and other celebrities, I don't think it's like, hey, turn on the mics, let's riff and let's get the free money from ZipRecruiter or whatever. I think it's much more thought out now because you see the power of it.
Yeah. So how is your podcast? Is it more thought out or more just turn the mics on and riff?
No, it's very thought out, which I like, but we want more. Let's turn the mics on and just go here. Because for me, I like being spur of the moment. I think that's where you get the best stuff.
Yeah.
But we do try to stick to like a format and consistency and let the audience know what they're going to get each time. But, yeah, man, we had a great one today with a comedian who's a friend of ours, Gary Owen, who used to perform for USC with Kevin Hart, ironically. And there might have been a 10-minute right turn where we started talking about vasectomies and how Gary got one, and basically he got a fade. Can I curse a little bit?
Yeah.
He basically got like he didn't know he got like a fade on his balls. He didn't know there was gonna be grooming involved. I never heard of that either. So I do like the freedom to go anywhere, but we always have a plan of what we're trying to do, and then just be loose enough where you could divert from the plan.
You mentioned WFAN earlier. I know you've done some stuff with the Fan. Were you a big time FAN listener growing up?
Big time fan listener. I mean, I used to record it on my little boom box, like while I'd go up to the park after school and play hoops, and I'd set it up and put the cassette in. I had a million cassettes and hit the record, and I would just tell my mom, like, don't touch this. And I would go up to the park for 2 hours, come home for dinner, stop it, eat dinner, do homework. And I didn't, for the first like 14 years of my life, I didn't have a TV in my room. We just had a TV in the living room. We didn't even have cable for a while there. And that's what I would listen to going to sleep at night. I just hit play. I put it right by the window by my bed. I had like a storefront kind of bedroom window, and just, that's what I would go to sleep to listening every night. So I always had a great deal of respect for that place. It's what my uncle always had on in the car. So I've done stuff with it. And look, I even think like Awful Announcing had some reports on this. I pretty much almost took a radio job there.
Yeah.
And I think it was podcasting that kind of kept me from doing that in a lot of ways. And that's a deeper conversation if you want to have it. But I have a great deal of respect for that place. It's an institution.
So, well, first, how did you like working with Evan Roberts?
Love Evan Roberts. He and I are probably a perfect match to talk sports because he's obviously Jets, Mets, Nets. Is he Devils? I think he's Devils.
Islanders.
He is Islanders. Okay, I don't know why I said Devils. I didn't know if it was Islanders or not. So, me and him talk. I remember the day I filled in for Craig Carton. I think it was like they were on Aaron Rodgers' watch, waiting for him to sign with the Jets. Roberts was waiting for, like, looking at his phone every 2 seconds. And I think we got that weird Panthers Texans trade, which ended up being Bryce Young and all that stuff. So I think Evan's great. I know Tiki for a long time. Brandon Tierney and I have been talking sports since like days, like I don't know if he was covering the Knicks like 20 years ago almost.
He was covering the Knicks for a long time ago for ESPN radio.
Yeah, so like I love Tierney, and look, there's a couple of dudes over there that I haven't really always gotten along with either. I respect their sports knowledge, but I'm sure they're not jumping to have a beer with me either.
So it actually did get close to happening, because like I remember you being among the list of potential candidates to replace Carton, but I didn't think it was serious.
Yeah, I didn't love how that all went down with the potential list. In my opinion, I wasn't on the potential. It was already over and done with by that point.
Oh,
Like
okay.
there was a potential, and yeah, I mean, let's just say I think it was pretty close. We could just leave it at that. Like it was close to happening. But by the time it was like, oh, there's a potential. I think even like KFC from Barstool was on there.
Yeah.
But by that point, I think they already made their decision at that point. So maybe that was just to generate a little talking point for a little while.
So
But
was it mutual that you didn't get the job, or was it your decision? Was it their decision?
oh, I can't speak for them, but I took myself out
Okay.
pretty early on because I just wasn't in a place to move back to New York at that time.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they were like, set on what their decision was, but I just kind of at some point early on was like, I can't move back to New York at this point. My wife loves being by her family, and I honestly was interested in doing my own thing, and
Yeah.
it's worked out so far. Who knows where it goes?
So how seriously were you considering it?
Oh, it's a dream job for me in a way, man. Like I was very, very seriously considering it because it's WFAN, man. To me, that place means a lot. And look, if I was gonna just say, okay, you can't talk about all sports. You have to lock in on certain things. For me, it would be New York sports.
Yeah.
That's what I know the most of. That's what I consume. I consume all sports, but that's what I consume the most of. So for me, I think you can affect the conversation in New York sports at that place. I think that's the weight they carry. And I hope they continue to do that and in the direction that they go in. But yeah.
Weekly podcast is one thing, but like the grind of daily radio is different. Is that something you think that you would have wanted?
Yeah, I think that might have been well, here's something I remember from some of our earlier conversations, and I'll leave the names out of it because I don't want to even say the guy's name, to be quite honest. But there was a question of like, hey, 5 days a week, would you even want to do? I'm like, guys, do you know what it's like working on an acting set? Like 5 days a week. We work 5 days a week, 60 hours a week. Like, what are we talking about here? Now, I know it's not 11 months a year.
Yeah.
Maybe it's 8 months a year, but my whole career has been like to the point where they don't even let you have to ask to take a pee break when you're on set. You have to say, hey, can I go 10-1? I really have to go. And then they walkie 40 people to make sure you have enough time to go take a piss. So yeah, I know the grind. I respect it. I know it's a grind. I know what I would have been getting into.
Yeah.
But in no way am I like, if this works out, I'm all in. I'm here every day, however, doing the job. So I just thought that was funny. Like, what do you think I'm doing? Do you think I'm off on a beach somewhere, just like working here? I'm a grinder, man. I've had to hustle for every single thing that I've ever accomplished. No one handed me anything.
Would you have kind of had to give up a lot of your acting career, do you think?
Oh, for sure. That's another part of it, too. And at that point though, the acting stuff, and it's still weird because we were coming out of COVID.
Yeah.
And then there was a union strike for a year, and that changed a whole lot of things. But yeah, there's not really a lot of room for I'm leaving next month to do 2 weeks on a movie in Florida, right? Like you can't really do that if you're expected to be on. Like maybe they'll give you your vacation time then, but I think that would have been a really hard thing.
Yeah.
But to be honest, it was a thought, but again, that place is so alluring, and I think I could have moved past that potentially because I just think it's a cool job.
Yeah. So what would you say seemed like a cooler job when you were a kid, taking over for Mike in the Mad Dog's time slot on WFAN, or being an actor?
The former, the Mike and the Mad, like for sure. I mean, my dream as a kid was I wanted to call Knicks games and Yankee games, but I never went to college for any of that. But yeah, I mean, anything in New York sports as a kid, that was my life. Acting wasn't something I came to till I was like 16, 17 years old. I didn't grow up like a theater kid or anything. It was much later.
Crazy to think that there's a world where it could have been you in Afternoon Drive on WFAN and Stu Gatz, the program director. Like both of those things like legitimately had a possibility of happening.
Who knows? Look, I will say though, everyone there, like I think they're all doing a great job. I love Tiki and Evan together. I think they're a great combo. Obviously, like I said, I know BT for years, and I don't get to listen as much. I catch a lot of the stuff more so on social these days. So I see like Sal Licata and stuff like that. So I just think these things always have a way of working out the way they were supposed to, you know?
Have you seen Chris Russo on First Take with Stephen A?
Yeah, it's I mean, when he starts talking about gummies, you got my attention. You got my attention right away. You talk about gambling and gummies. All right, all the things I was told by my mom to stay away from because they're a dead end. Gambling and weed are now like two of the biggest enterprises in the country. Yeah, no, I mean, it's so fun to watch, and I hope I just hope he's enjoying doing all that stuff. It seems like he is.
Have you been on First Take? I know you've done stuff. You have.
I go back with First Take literally to like the Skip Bayless, Stephen A. I remember meeting Skip Bayless and Stephen A. at Cold Pizza. I was doing Cold Pizza back in the day.
Okay.
And then I was going on First Take sort of before. I mean, it was already popular, but didn't quite explode. And I really feel like it was like the Tebow era is really what drove it. And then I would still go on. Stephen A. just had me on this podcast about like 2 months ago. And yeah, I just think it's cool. Like and Skip would always say, like, you're good at this. This is like a fun conversation, because I would go at him pretty hard about, you know, him trying to make excuses of like why Wes Welker should have caught that pass and the Giants should have lost. I'm like, it was a horrible pass, and he's 5'10". So, and that wasn't the reason why the Giants lost the game, Skip. You know better. So, yeah, though, I mean, I was always, and honestly, the things that always stood out, I mean, I think the biggest side effect from my acting career, whether, you know, whatever level of success anyone might think I reached, but for me, the biggest side effect that has helped has been people giving me a chance to talk sports, maybe because I was on a show, not knowing if I knew anything, and then me being able to talk the talk a little bit. Yeah. You know, Dan Patrick had me guest host for him at a time where I had no experience, 3 hours, 4 hours on DP, and Jim Rome. Those were the first two to kind of give me guest host radio jobs, Jim Rome and Dan Patrick.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good way to start.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I wanted to really like blow it up when I filled in for Jim Rome and we had Wahlberg on as a guest. I thought like that, and it's a great guest to have. Wahlberg called in, did me the solid, but I think he thought we were on like satellite radio, and back then no one quite knew what that was. And he thought he could curse because maybe Howard Stern he was thinking, and he like dropped an F-bomb. I think we had to dump Wahlberg.
Oh no!
The show. Yeah, they had to hit the dump button.
How was getting to sit next to Aaron Rodgers on Celebrity Row at a Knicks game?
That was cool, man. You know, I don't know why they sat me next to him. I had met Aaron before that. It wasn't the first time I was meeting him. I've met him out in LA a couple of times. But yeah, maybe it's just the way it worked out. But honestly, we really talked deep hoops. Like, it was a complete basketball nerd, and Sauce was there too. And it just was, I mean, it was a playoff game, you know, it was a huge game.
Yeah.
And we just went real deep with basketball. That's all I really remember, is just talking, and like, you know, talked a little thing like, you know, New York, he was out and about.
Yeah. That was when he was just getting started.
Yeah. So a little bit of New York stuff, but we talked a lot of hoops, man. A lot of hoops.
Yeah. So it wasn't like conspiracies or anything.
No, I don't think the dude walks around like, hey, have you heard? Do you really think the earth is round? Like, I don't think he walks around just ready to go. I think he probably accepts whatever the conversation is looking like.
How does Celebrity Row work? Like, do you just kind of show up and see what they have available, or like?
I mean, not with me. With me, if I sometimes will get invited, like, hey, if you'd like to come, or if there's a game I really want to go to, I try to, you know, talk, like give much advance notice as possible. Because obviously too, you know, the Knicks are really good and entertaining, and it's one of the most expensive tickets in sports, if not the most. I would be curious to see, anyway, ticket prices and that stuff. So again, to me, this is by far the coolest part of any success I've had, is that I occasionally get to go. I don't abuse the privilege. I don't ever go to a game thinking that like this is how it's supposed to be. anytime I'm there, I could just promise anyone I am inside just going, I cannot believe that I get to sit here. Because as a kid, I sat all over that building.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just never take it for granted. And you got to remember something too, man. This started for me in like 2007. I did a commercial for the Knicks that Spike Lee directed that aired on MSG, and it was featuring our new draft picks, Nate Robinson and David Lee. And we were playing this pickup game in the park, right? And I think that's when they invited me to my first game, when they unveiled that commercial. And that's 2007. So look at some of those teams. I mean, I remember going to the games when it wasn't necessarily the hottest ticket in town, and no disrespect to Chris Duhon, who had like a 20 assist game, but he's starting at point. My man Channing Frye running the pick and roll with Duhon. I was there, man, screaming for the team, going home mad that they lost.
So have you ever, like, now that the Knicks are getting good, have you ever been bumped off celebrity row? Like, you're sitting in your seat and the security comes over and says, "Oh, sorry, Howard Stern just walked in and he'd like to sit here now"?
No, nothing like that's ever happened. And honestly, if he did, I wouldn't care. Basketball it's probably my favorite sport. I mean, it's obviously football in America is king, and it's very, very close. But I really will sit anywhere. I swear. I just love watching basketball. I love going to like my 6-year-old's little basketball game. I just love watching hoops. So no, it hasn't happened. And again, I don't go to like 15 games a year. I go to a select handful and I give them plenty of notice. And look, I've been told no before, meaning like we're basically sold out. We're booked. Like, okay, cool. No worries.
How was filming Entourage courtside?
Amazing. The things that stick out about that, we're always everyone trying to give their lines away. Nobody wanted to have to speak because we just wanted to watch the game. No one wanted to have to worry about cues and where the camera is and all that. But that was always a real unique part of Entourage that set us apart. I think no shows were doing that, especially back then. I think over the years, maybe a few movies have shot at games and stuff like that. But to be sitting courtside for the Lakers, Staples Center was kind of new back then at that point. It just was incredible. I didn't want any lines because I just wanted to watch the game. We'd always get in at like 4:00 to the Staples Center, get to rehearse, interact with Kobe and Lamar Odom did a cameo after a game one time. We even had Dr. Butt. We didn't actually air this part because it never made sense and we didn't think he would do it. But we were at one of the lounges where I think after the game party goes on, after we shot, and Dr. Buss was there. And we asked Dr. Buss if he wanted to do a cameo. He's like, sure. So I think my lines, this is in some unaired footage somewhere, where I go up to Dr. Buss and I like just make a joke. And I'm like, I forget who I said for the Knicks, but I was basically saying, we'll trade you Charlie Ward for Kobe Bryant, right? Like some ridiculous trade offer. And he actually took it serious and like, well, here's why we'll never do that. Let me tell you. And he broke down. I'm like, Dr. Buss, I know. I believe me. I'm just trolling right here. So it was incredible. As a sports fan, Entourage was probably the number one show you could be on because athletes loved the show. And our characters were sports fans.
Why do you think? Why did Entourage resonate with athletes so much?
Brandon, I ask athletes that question a lot because I don't know whether you would have thought it would have resonated with maybe actors and musicians more. And it did resonate. We had a lot of great actors playing themselves over the years, but I just think that maybe athletes at the time, way more had the entourage than the actor. Like Wahlberg certainly did, and that's who we sort of modeled it after. But I don't know, like did Brad Pitt back in the day have an entourage? I mean, you could say Leo did for sure, I guess, but like I think it was just way more common with sports and athletics, and it got to a point toward the end of the show, there would be people who would be in town and would just come do a set visit. So you look behind at the monitors, we're called Video Village, when we're shooting the scene. It's like, oh, shoot, Kevin Durant's here today. What does he do? He's just hanging out. Or like, oh, here's the number one draft pick that the Bucks Jameis went, and you just like it. I couldn't really ever explain it. But again, the highlight was probably when we got to like do stuff with the Yankees, and it was like Teixeira and A-Rod coming on, playing themselves, shot at Yankee Stadium. That was one of the big highlights for me.
You had mentioned that you got into acting later. You were 16 or so. What got you into acting?
Yeah, I remember I was like I just started college. I was always like a pretty good student. And then at some point in high school, I was just like, this is over for me. Like school, so I was bored of it. I was over it. And then I got into college. I wasn't really doing anything. I was failing. I wasn't really going. I was just skipping classes or whatever. But I'm like, you know what? I've always, similar to sports, I always had a big love for film and TV. Always kind of kept me out of trouble. So I took like a film class and an acting class. But like, all right, maybe I'll like this because I like movies and TV. And you know, people always say like you caught the acting bug or whatever. You know, from that moment I walked in there and I instantly knew it's like, oh, you could kind of take all the bullshit that you may have gone through in your life and channel it into this character, even though the character's not going through exactly what you went through. It's like, oh, my father died as a kid, and that's always, you know, weighed on me. But maybe that could come out in another way. So I kind of found that link early on, and some people thought I was like okay at it, and it just felt right. I think that's like the biggest issue with college and kids is you're supposed to figure out and know what you want to do at like 18, 19 years old. I think that's a real big burden for any kid to know what they want. For me, I got lucky. I figured it out like 17, 18. This is what I want to do. But I've seen a lot of people figure out what they want to do at life at 32.
Yeah.
But now it's like so far, it's just almost like, man, if I can go to college now, it would be much, much different. There'd be a million other things I'd do.
Did you like the way your character developed on Entourage?
Yeah, I do. I definitely do. I always remember complaining to Doug Ellen, our showrunner, creator, that a lot of the other characters were developing and I was kind of stuck here. I don't even have like a name yet. We don't even know what Turtle's real name is, let alone like he's just kind of happy. And that was a little bit of the beauty of the character. He was just happy cheerleading for Vince, being part of that crew and knowing like, hey, we got a lottery ticket here that and let's just cash it in and make sure we don't screw it up. But at some point as the show went on, I don't know if it was out of necessity because like he went through those characters and it was my turn, or just he always had it in his mind. But probably around like season 5, the character started evolving. And I was also too naturally the youngest one in the group in real life, just timed out that way. So as you're watching the character, you're also watching me go from 23 to 33, you know? You still are growing up a lot in those years, even though physically you might not look very different. And I did change the way I looked, you know, through the show and lost a bunch of weight and started taking fitness as a big priority. So, yeah, I do love it. And he ended up being the richest one potentially out of all of them, which I don't think a lot of people saw coming.
Was the weight loss your own thing, like personal, or was that for the show?
No, that was my own thing. You know, with HBO too, even back then, we always heard about like The Sopranos. They would take like a year and a half in between seasons. Also, because I just imagine that's a very, very hard show to write, and it's an hour long. Entourage was a little different, but we had some pretty healthy breaks too. So you could do a lot in those breaks. And for me, I just turned 30 years old, I think, at the time. I was about 205. I'm like barely 5'7" in shoes. So 205 on me is a lot of weight. And I just didn't I felt like shit. I felt awful. And, you know, I always played sports. So like the fact that I couldn't even really play pickup basketball and get through it without like heavily breathing. So I just started small and like lost 5 pounds, lost 8. So after I don't know if it was like season 5, maybe going to season 6, I'd lost like 20 pounds. I was down like 185-ish. Slight noticeable difference, but nothing to write home about. Then we had a really long break, and I just like, that's where it was like trainers, food, like I was diligent, and I went down to like 143, bro. I was like 8% body fat. I came back to shoot season 7, and everybody was like, what the fuck? This show is like a direct continuation from where we left off. Where they were going to have to say you got your stomach stapled? Where were we going to say you did? And I'm like, that's not my problem. Now, it was always for health and feeling better. Like, I don't really care how I look. Like, yeah, we all care a little bit how we look. But for me, it wasn't like I want to get some leading man parts. I don't get those. That's not my skill set. But it did change things in my career. I did start getting a lot of different parts and looks for different roles that I wouldn't have. And now, ironically, a lot of the times I don't get parts because they're like, can he be funny though? Like, it's kind of like in shape, thick. Can he be like this like schlubby funny guy? I'm like, well, I did that for like 10 years, but I guess I can't do it anymore.
Yeah, I feel like so many shows start out with a character who is that kind of like schlubby funny guy, and then as the seasons mount, they almost lean into it too much and they dumb the character down too much to a point where it becomes unfunny.
Right.
And I think like they could have gone in that direction with Turtle, but instead they did eventually make him kind of become more independent near the end.
Yeah. I had some tough times early in the show because the character, even though he wasn't like the best looking and fit guy or whatever, and I don't. The character had a lot of confidence, especially with women, like on the show, the way he was written, and maybe it's because he had Vince behind him, all right. And I just in my life, I never operated like that. I always found it hard to talk to girls sometimes, and especially in like loud clubs. I'm like not overly tall or like if I can't make you laugh, I have no chance at all of like getting a date with you or something if I can't use self-deprecating humor. So it took me a while to get used to like, no, this guy, he pretty knows he's not the best looking guy in the room, but like he's still confident. And you have to kind of play it that way. And the other thing that I was good at, I think people identified was like the loyalty of it. And I think too, that's what athletes responded to. Even though Turtle, by all accounts, was like living off of Vince, you could say he's a mooch, a parasite almost in some way. But man, like that, Turtle believed that Vince was like the biggest movie star on the planet. And when the times got tough for Vince, as they did throughout the show, you didn't see like a lot of other Entourage members bail. Like, all right, this guy's burned out. Let's find the next. No, we, for better or worse. So it was a lot of fun, Brandon. I had a great time.
Did you have ever have a say in the direction of the show or your character?
No, I wouldn't say I had a say, but Doug Ellen was always really good with, and we were all we all became friends. Doug and I, had meals together 5 times a week sometimes, even when we weren't shooting. So you're around each other that much. I don't think I could go pitch Doug an idea, and if it was a good idea, maybe he'd run with it. But Doug pretty much knew what he was gonna do. Most importantly, like Doug just knew what worked and what didn't. He had the ear for the dialogue and what these characters would do. So I would always pitch stuff here or there, and some things maybe he would take and most he wouldn't. But, it wasn't like I had control, but he wasn't like my way or the highway kind of guy,
The cast is still close. Like there's some legitimate friendships that came out of that.
Oh yeah. Connolly and Dylan and I love that Dylan has like a phone now and texts on an iPhone. Like I hear from Dylan all the time. Connolly, Adrian, not as much, but not for any like negative reasons. People always like, how come Adrian lives in Austin? He doesn't live in LA or New York anymore. I think he just had a baby. He's about to have a second. Like, Connolly has a kid. I have 2 kids. Like a lot's changed. So we're not always together, but the fun part, and this is how you have a real friendship with anybody. The way to tell is if you are not around each other for a long time and then get together and it's like no time has passed.
Yeah.
And that's what we have always had. And I'm pretty confident we'll always have that.
Was the movie enough of a reunion? Like, would you be interested in revisiting Entourage in some form again?
Yeah, it's funny, right? Well, the movie did okay, good, not great, right? In order to ever get a sequel or another one, we would have had to do a huge number, which the movie didn't. And there was a lot of time in between the show and the movie that maybe if it was not as big of a window, maybe it would have done better. Look, every time everyone talks reboot and getting the band back together again, for most of the last 5 years, I was been like, it's impossible. Number one, we did everything that we can do with these guys. So there's nothing left to do. And number two, like, I don't know, what does that even look like right now? So much has changed, and I just don't know where these guys fit, and we're all a lot older. We're not still living together. I don't think it could still be the same vibe.
Yeah.
I would say about a year ago, we all got together and had a little bit of reunion of our own. I started thinking like, all right, and I did write for the show with Doug in the last 2 seasons, but not like a lot. But I did start to think, all right, here's an idea. Oh, this would be funny. And then Kevin Dillon and I, for the 20-year anniversary, we shot this spot for F1 and Cash App, right? And I wasn't nervous, but I was almost like, God, could Kevin and I, we haven't been drama and turtle since 2014 on screen. And we weren't being drama and turtle, it was Kevin and Jerry, but we were doing the wink, we were doing the wink to the camera. And after just seeing one take of Dylan with his sunglasses, take his sunglasses off and just stare into the camera and go, we got to get to Vegas, bro. I'm like, man, that guy still got his fastball. And we had the Entourage guys on Throwbacks. The episode just dropped last week. I now could officially say, I see it. I know what it would be. I would know how to do it. Now, obviously, Doug would have to really figure out what it is, but I have ideas, and I could totally see it being a thing. Do I think it'll ever happen? I probably not. But for the first time ever, creatively, I see it now.
Yeah.
I see what these guys are doing.
Who was the most fun to work with, like in terms of an athlete or any celebrity making a cameo?
Man, we've had so many great ones. I always loved when Bob Saget would come on, and Bob passed away a few years back, and it was awful and tragic too soon. But he came on very early when it was very hard to get cameos because no one knew who we were, and everyone thought we were making fun of everyone. And he came on playing this very heightened version of himself. And I mean, not every day, but one of the lines that gets thrown at me in the street more than anything is like, did you just get cock blocked by Bob Saget? Like I've heard that thousands of times. So I've always loved working with Bob, who became a friend. Athlete wise, I am a golf nerd. It was really cool to have Phil Mickelson on, hitting golf balls with him. Obviously, Tom Brady was an iconic episode for a lot of reasons. It was weird too, because like it was coming off the Brady injury year. So no one had seen Brady in like a year and a half. Steve Nash was a really cool one. Matt Damon obviously has one of the more memorable, again, playing a very heightened version. It was always the best when guys or girls would come on and be willing to like make fun of themselves a little bit, knowing the joke's not on you. The joke is with you. And Matt did an amazing job of that. And we just had, the list was crazy that we've had on.
Was there ever a star, and this doesn't have to be just in Entourage, just in your career, was there ever a star who was disappointing to work with? Like man, Tom Hanks and Robert De Niro, they are jerks.
Honestly, there is nothing that pops out in my mind right away of like, and I've worked with De Niro on a movie and he was awesome. And I still, there's no, I'm not even trying to like not call someone out. I don't really have, the fun part with Entourage is that usually it was those people who wanted to be there. Yeah. It wasn't like us begging in the end of like, hey, come on, we'll pay you a bunch of money, because no one was getting paid for those cameos, right? Like very basic scale minimum. So I think anyone who came on Entourage genuinely wanted to be there. So I never really felt that. Even Eminem, I remember being curious, like, what's Eminem going to be like, right? Like, I just wonder. And awesome. Just happy to be there, cool with everyone, hung with the crew, signed stuff, was like awesome to work with.
That's cool. What is more important as an actor, like in selecting a role? Is it the role? What the role pays, or is it the script? Like, because Harrison Ford, he just he talked about the Captain America, and he had commented that he agreed to do it because he's an idiot for money. So like, obviously, it wasn't the script or the costume that drew him to that role.
Yeah, that's I mean, there's a fine line there. My gut answer is always going to be the script, right? the project. That's a lot easier to say and do when you're young and single and don't have overhead and kids, and it's just a different thing. Like if you want to live the life of an artist and only bet on that, there's a lot of nobility in that, and I think that's great. And you could potentially spare yourself from, doing things you don't want to do necessarily, right?
Yeah.
But I just think realistically, number one, like in the Captain America stuff, it's like, okay, you could go around and do indies and small little but like the competition for the great stuff is enormous, right? And you may be able to get the great stuff now. Will you be able to get the great stuff in 5 years? If you make good choices, yeah. But at some point too, I just think you have to be a part of something that makes money, because that's kind of how the system works. Like, hey, we could cast you in this because you helped get us our budget. Like the business element of it is related to actors getting paid and what they get paid and how they get movies and shows greenlit. So, for me, I haven't really been faced with many decisions like that. I don't get giant multi-million-dollar movie offers.
Yeah.
So TV is a whole different story, but TV is always a different story because you're signing on for like 7 years, right? So you should get paid well. You're playing this part for 5 to 8 years. So, but I don't know. I could see where it's easy to say like, hey, I only want to do the good stuff. By the way, Brandon, you could fuck up a good script too. Okay. I've seen good scripts not turn out good. And I've seen scripts that, whether it's TV or indies, like, I don't know about could go either way, and they turn out to be great. So I've seen the really, really good projects go to shit too. So who knows?
Is there a role that you would really like to play? Like is there a dream role or a dream project on your list other than Mike and the Mad Dog?
Yeah, I think, again, if you would have asked me this like years ago, I would have probably said some kind of action thing. Look, I never was going to play an athlete. It would be awesome to play a coach, right? I think just to do a sports movie, although I'm very concerned about sports movies in general because documentaries are so good that they've almost ended the sports movie, because we could just go watch the real thing in a documentary. Like, I would love a new golf movie, right? But then you can go watch Full Swing, and it gives you all of that and then some, and these are the real players.
Right.
So a coach for sure. But honestly, at this point, I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. I always looked kind of young. I never get the dad roles, ever. On Power, I had a daughter for 6 seasons, so that was really cool. I would like to just play like the dad, but like, it could be a little drama. We can make it a drama. It doesn't have to be a comedy, but I want to start getting the dad roles.
Jerry, you were great. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Brandon. Good talk, man.
That is Jerry Ferrara. I'm Brandon Contes. This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Please rate and subscribe to this podcast. Please also subscribe to Awful Announcing's YouTube page. But regardless of how you consume Awful Announcing and the Awful Announcing Podcast, thanks for listening and be good.
Thanks for listening to the Awful Announcing Podcast. For the latest news spanning the sports media landscape and more, check out awfulannouncing.com and follow us at Awful Announcing.